In 2004, a leaked recording circulated on the internet. It was a customer service call. A Filipino agent, somewhere in Manila, was calmly walking an irate American caller through a billing dispute. The caller laughed at her accent. He mocked the way she said certain words. And then, at the end of the call, he rated the service 5 stars. Because she solved his problem flawlessly. That moment, that contradiction, is the story we're telling today. Because while the world was busy laughing, the Philippines was quietly building one of the most economically powerful linguistic workforces in human history. And now, the world is starting to realize it. To understand what's happening, you have to go back to where this all started. In the early 1990s, American corporations faced a problem. Labor costs were rising. Customer service departments were expensive. And a growing obsession with shareholder returns meant that every dollar spent on a phone operator was a dollar not returned to investors. The solution, as it turned out, was 7,641 islands away. The Philippines, a nation with a 94% literacy rate, a colonial history with the United States spanning nearly half a century, and a population that grew up watching American television, studying in English medium schools, and absorbing the rhythms of a language that wasn't originally their own. When the first business process outsourcing firms arrived in Manila, they discovered something that no economist had formally quantified yet. A nation of people who were functionally bilingual from birth, and who charged a fraction of what their American counterparts demanded. By 2010, the Philippines had overtaken India as the world's largest call center destination. Let that sink in. Not tied with, not close to, overtaken. And yet, the cultural narrative hadn't caught up with the economic reality. The accent, that particular cadence, that musicality, that way of rolling certain consonants and stretching certain vowels, became a punchline in internet forums. A meme, a thing people did impressions of at parties. But here's what those people didn't understand. The very qualities that made the Filipino accent distinctive, they were the same qualities making billions of dollars move across borders every single year. And there's a reason for that. One that goes deeper than economics. One that sits at the intersection of linguistics, colonial history, and human psychology. But before we get to why the Filipino accent became the backbone of a trillion-dollar industry, we need to talk about something that almost no one is discussing. There's a specific phonetic quality in the way most Filipinos speak English. A quality that Western communication researchers have spent years trying to replicate and largely failed to engineer artificially. We'll get to that in a moment. First, let's talk about what neutral accent actually means, and why the definition of that term is quietly being rewritten. For decades, the gold standard in broadcast English was what linguists called General American, the flat, placeless accent amid Western American newscasters. No region. No color, no origin. The idea was that a neutral accent was the most comprehensible, the most trustworthy, the most professional. This assumption quietly governed hiring decisions at call centers, multinational companies, and media organizations worldwide. It also happened to be wrong. In 2019, a study conducted across Southeast Asia, the Gulf region, and Western Europe found something that disrupted the conventional wisdom. Filipino accented English was consistently rated as among the most comprehensible non-native English accents by listeners across cultures. Not American English, not British English, Filipino English. The reason, linguists argue, is something called phonemic clarity, the degree to which each sound in a word is distinctly produced without the elisions and reductions that characterize rapid native speech. When a native American English speaker says, a Filipino speaker often says, I am going to, each syllable, each phoneme, enunciated with care. For a non-native listener in Germany, or Saudi Arabia, or Japan, that clarity isn't a flaw. It's a lifeline. And corporations began to notice. Not just call centers. Corporations. Accenture, JPMorgan, HSBC, IBM, Citibank. All of them built significant Philippine operations not merely for cost savings, but for what insiders began calling linguistic reliability. The Filipino workforce didn't just speak English. They spoke it in a way that almost anyone, anywhere could understand. And then there's the other factor, the one that communication researchers spent years trying to reverse engineer. There's a measurable, studied, documented quality in the way Filipinos speak that registers as emotionally warm to listeners across cultures. Researchers attribute this partly to the tonal nature of Filipino language families, where pitch and rhythm carry emotional information, bleeding into the way English is spoken. The result is an accent that is simultaneously clear, warm, and accessible. Three qualities that, in the business of human communication, are worth more than almost anything else. By 2023, the Philippine BPO industry, built almost entirely on the back of this one accent, was generating $32 billion in annual revenue. $32 billion. From an accent the world spent decades laughing at. But the economic story, as extraordinary as it is only half of what's happening. Because somewhere in Oxford, England, something happened that Filipinos have been waiting generations for. Something that no amount of revenue figures, no corporate partnership, no economic report could have accomplished. A dictionary changed its definition. And what that means for language, for identity, for the 110 million people who speak English the Filipino way, is more significant than most people realize. Language is power, not metaphorically, literally. The language that a civilization grants legitimacy to determines what knowledge is preserved, what culture is transmitted, and, critically, who is allowed to be considered educated. For much of the 20th century, Filipinos occupied a strange linguistic purgatory. They were taught in English. They wrote in English. They dreamed, they fought, they loved, often in English. And yet their version of English was consistently treated as a deviation. A corruption. A lesser form of the real thing. The Oxford English Dictionary changed that. Over the past decade, in an ongoing series of revisions, Oxford has formally recognized hundreds of Philippine English words and expressions. Terms like barkada for a close circle of friends, despedida for a farewell gathering, kilig for the giddy excitement of romantic moments, alongside recognizing Philippine English as a legitimate, distinct variety of world English. Not broken English. Not accented English. Not English as a second language. World English. This matters because of what it represents in the architecture of linguistic legitimacy. The Oxford English Dictionary is not just a book. It is the most cited authority on the English language in the world. When Oxford recognizes a word, it moves from the margins of language into its permanent record. It becomes real. Officially, irrevocably real. And when Oxford recognizes a variety, when it says that Philippine English is not a mistake but a dialect, not an error but an evolution, it is making a statement about the people who speak it. It is saying, you did not corrupt this language. You contributed to it. Consider the history that makes this moment meaningful. The Philippines was colonized by Spain for 333 years, then by the United States for nearly 50. English arrived not as a gift, but as a tool of assimilation, a way of reshaping a people, replacing indigenous languages of instruction, and producing a workforce that could serve empire. And yet, what happened was something more complex than colonizers intended. The Filipino people didn't simply absorb English. They transformed it. They brought to it the cadences of Tagalog, Ilocano, Cebuano, Bicolano. They gave it warmth it didn't have before. They gave it words for feelings and relationships that English had no vocabulary for. They made it theirs. And now, Oxford agrees. There's a particular kind of justice that doesn't arrive with fanfare. It arrives quietly, in data, in dictionaries, in the slow turning of institutional opinion. It doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. The Filipino accent was mocked for being too soft. Too musical, too formal, not native enough. And yet, it built a $32 billion industry. It became the preferred voice of global customer experience. It was rated among the most comprehensible English accents across multiple cultural contexts. And now, it has been formally recognized by the oldest, most authoritative record of the English language in the world. The woman on that 2004 call, the one who solved the problem while being laughed at, she was never the punchline. She was the point. She was part of a workforce that, through sheer consistency, skill, and the quiet power of a voice that traveled well across cultures, helped reshape how the world does business. How companies communicate, how nations think about which languages have value, and who gets to decide. The truth about the Filipino accent isn't a story about linguistics. It's a story about what happens when a people take the tools of their colonizers, their language, their syllables, their syntax, and build something new with them. Something that the whole world eventually has to sit down and respect. It just took a little while for everyone else to catch up. If you found this story worth your time, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want more investigations into the economic forces hiding behind cultural moments the world tends to overlook. There are more stories like this one. We'll find them.